Can we just back up a little bit and let's in the best way possible and the simplest way possible, if you can explain insulin, and are we trying to be insulin sensitive, insulin resistant? Like I find myself, even after studying a lot of this stuff for a long time, kind of being like, wait, what was that one? And what was this? What's leptin do again? And stuff like that. So if you can explain insulin and insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance, and how someone becomes like pre-diabetic and diabetic and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, Mark, so there's a lot there to unpack, but I'm delighted to unpack it. This is because this is the only thing I know anything about. So Insulin is a hormone that classically is only viewed through the lens of glucose. So the average person who hears the word insulin just thinks, oh, well, that's just a diabetic and they need it for glucose control. In fact, that idea is so firmly entrenched in people's minds, including very educated individuals. And I do air quotes on that on purpose because I'm one of those guys who thinks that credentials after a name really don't mean anything. It's just a sign of someone being patient enough and willing to take the abuse of academia.
Coming from a double doctor over there too.
Yeah. So I would want anyone to know that there's no ego attached to any of these credentials. It really is just show me what you know. So in the case of with insulin, it's viewed classically through the lens of glucose, which is wildly unfair because insulin does hundreds or thousands of things throughout the body. And different things at each cell. Literally, every cell in the body has insulin receptors. In other words, insulin has an effect at every single cell in the body. And I mean them all, from brain cells to bone cells, from liver cells to lung cells. It doesn't matter. Insulin will affect every single cell in the body. And the theme of insulin's actions will be to store energy. Basically, that's the theme, the overarching or the umbrella idea, the effect of insulin at every cell. It will be to, in some way, stimulate the uptake of building blocks like amino acids, fatty acids, or glucose, and then tell the cell what to do with it, either basically creating bigger molecules. So insulin is anabolic in that sense, although I wouldn't want someone to think that I'm implying that it's anabolic at the muscle. That's a bit of, once again, a bit misunderstood. But nevertheless, insulin tells the body what to do with energy. And then when someone is living a life where it's chronically bumping up their insulin because they're following the standard dietary advice, right? That they're eating high starch, high sugar meals because they've been told to get 60% of their calories from carbohydrates. And they've been told to eat 6 meals a day. That is a wonderful way to make sure that insulin is elevated every waking moment and even well into the first part of the night. And chronically elevated insulin will cause insulin resistance. Now, there are other inputs that will do this, but that is a fundamental feature of insulin resistance. And it's you cannot separate the two, but it is one of the two sides of the coin that I'm going to call insulin resistance. So that one side of this coin, as we now sort of transition into defining insulin resistance, is the chronically elevated insulin. That is a fundamental feature of insulin resistance. And we have to appreciate that to appreciate how insulin resistance affects virtually every chronic disease. But the other side of the coin is that some cells, like the muscle, like the brain, for example, like blood vessels in some aspects of the body, they become insulin resistant. So insulin isn't doing what it used to do in those cells. So the effect of insulin is compromised. Not all cells, though, but some of the cells aren't responding to insulin the same way they were before. So those are the two sides of the coin of insulin resistance. Some cells aren't responding, but others are responding as well as they ever did. And blood levels of insulin are chronically elevated. Now, these two things matter in different ways. And let's take, just to highlight the relevance of this, let's just pick two, maybe very unexpected disorders. Erectile dysfunction in men. That is thought to be one of the earliest symptoms of insulin resistance. And it's because those blood vessel cells in that guy, they become insulin resistant. And insulin will dilate blood vessels. It'll tell blood vessels to expand to improve the blood flow to a tissue. And in that poor guy, his blood vessels have become insulin resistant, and now the vessels don't dilate, and now he can't get an erection. However, and so that is a consequence of insulin resistance. But in a woman, the most common form of infertility in a female is polycystic ovary syndrome. And that's the consequence of the chronically elevated insulin, where her very high levels of insulin are inhibiting an enzyme in her ovaries called aromatase. And you guys have probably heard of this. So aromatase is an enzyme that converts testosterone into the estrogens, because it's a little known fact that all estrogens were once testosterone. And so if a guy is, for example, bumping his testosterone up through exogenous steroid use, he will sometimes take aromatase inhibitors to make sure that that testosterone isn't getting converted into too much estrogens, and then he's getting consequences of too much estrogens, which no guy wants. But in each case, erectile dysfunction and polycystic ovary syndrome, each is a perfect example of, on one hand, the insulin resistance, and on one hand, the hyperinsulinemia, both of which kind of combine to create the overall syndrome or condition that we call insulin resistance.